Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the Post 23, the Battery Hen Supervisor. This is a terribly upsetting post. The research that I've conducted for this week is profoundly upsetting. I've cried my way through a lot of this reading, so it's been a tough week and it will be a tough post. But to start us off in our journey of the Battery Hen Supervisor, I wanted to commence with a story. And this story emerged when I just become a dean. Let me set the scene for you. I have a memory of speaking at the front of this auditorium. And at the back of the auditorium are all these older men, arms crossed, radiating with anger. And when they spoke to me, they did address me as girly. Always a pleasure, and particularly considering I was in my 40s at the time. But there were all these men, angry men at the back. And then in this auditorium, oddly, the second, third and fourth row were filled with young women, all looking at the front. Now, my role in this meeting was to simply get PhDs finished. In this particular group that had incredibly long candidatures, and my role was to get those students to examination. Now, I was the messenger for that, the messenger for an intervention that was required. But my sensory memory of this meeting is these incredibly angry men at the back, and they were shouting at me and they were pointing at me. And one gentleman I always remember said, "Tara, the students don't care if they're in a lab for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years doing their PhD. They like being in the lab." End of quote. 8 years. And I looked at this gentleman in the eye. And the most troubling thing about looking him in the eye was that he believed what he was saying. And from that moment, my eyes then flicked down to the second row of the auditorium, where these very young women were seated. Eyes wide, so young, eyes wide. And I looked at them with their eyes like this. And one of them mouthed at me, "Please help us." Now that memory still keeps me awake at night, but it does provide the great entree into our battery hen farmer model. When I saw those battery hen farmer supervisors at the back and the battery hen students at the front, what is going to happen? What is the intervention there? And so that story is our model into our discussion today, colleagues. And this model for supervision that we're going to be talking about, it destroys lives, it destroys careers, and we're entering some really murky, yucky spaces in academic life. Research misconduct, plagiarism, weird sexual ambivalence, copyright and intellectual rights, but also profound mental health issues. This is everything in our session this week. So these are big issues, but as always, let's start with the model. Let's start with what we're talking about, the battery hen farmer. Now, the battery hen farmer only cares for their eggs. The battery hen supervisor only cares about the creation of papers and neglects everything else, including the thesis, in the endless production of those papers. The reason the battery hen exists is to eat and to lay eggs. The whole system is organised so that the hen can eat, so they can lay eggs. So they are egg-laying machines without feeling, without consciousness of their purpose. So this is a confined life of fear, of sweat, of physical immobility. And as shown by Sophie McCoy's work, which I've enjoyed reading this week, when battery hens are rescued, they're confused by the freedom. They're unable to stand, they're often featherless, and their combs are floppy and often a pink colour, and they are literally hen-pecked. They are fragile bodies, lacking care or respect for their welfare. So these hens are sent to slaughter about 18 months into their battery hen program after they've laid an egg a day. Because after that time, 18 months, they're supposedly not commercially viable, so they're killed. So all sorts of empowering organisations exist around the world to rescue ex-battery hens. And I've read a lot of their publications this week, and they're incredibly inspiring movements, can I say. And in one of her books, Sophie McCoy stated, quote, "Saving one hen won't save the world, but it will save the world for that hen." End of quote. We'll come back to that great phrase at the end of this post. So the descriptions that the authors use to describe ex-battery hens, those descriptions are simply devastating. Frightened, featherless chickens that haven't seen natural daylight in their lives, because if they don't see natural daylight, they eat less, and they have a tendency to peck other hens less. Many are standing on wire floors and they're debeaked. So these hens produce a high number of eggs for a short period of time, depleting their body of calcium, and their bones become brittle. So this is a story of animal cruelty. And yes, thankfully, we've got all sorts of interventions in this system now through organic or barn or free-range laid eggs. And that's tremendous. Those systems reduce, they don't eradicate the cruelty involved in human food production. So battery cages exist as a housing system. It's a housing system to make money and to exploit hens so that they produce as many eggs as possible in the shortest period of time. So from this introduction into the battery hen system, let's now look at how we can move this model metaphorically into an understanding of higher degree supervision. This is a model of supervision, probably of all the models we're talking about. This is the model that is most reliant on homology. That is, a supervisor repeats the pattern of their previous experiences. Now, in some disciplines, and I'm talking particularly medical sciences and experimental sciences, there is a culture of, I have suffered, therefore you must suffer. I worked in the lab for 65 hours a week. That's reality. That's what you've got to do. If you want to be a scientist, that's what you've got to do. And how often have we heard all of this stuff, yep? So this is homology, repeating the patterns of the past. It has a bit of toughen up princess to it. Also has a bit of sort of the Monty Python Four Yorkshiremen sketch to it. I suffered, oh I suffered. Now these supervisors, even if they did suffer, even if what they're describing did actually exist in the past, they're not recognising that our world, our systems, our universities have changed. But instead they start sentences endlessly with the phrase, when I did my PhD, when I did my PhD, when I did my PhD. So this mantra, when I did my PhD, becomes a mantra for absolutely unspeakable practices. These supervisors need papers, and the battery hens, their students, have one job. You have one job: to produce papers. Not their thesis. Your job is to write papers. Now, remember that these battery hens are almost always young students. Now, what's happened in the last 20 years, and this is a great thing, is our doctoral programs have diversified. So a lot more women are now in our PhD programs. We've got a lot more older crew, which is tremendous. We've got crew with impairments and disabilities, and we've got a lot of students now who are part-time and self-funded. So the battery hens are very, very different from this diversified profile. The battery hens are young students, and most frequently they're students that were trained in the institution where they're doing their PhD. So that means they did their undergraduate degree and their PhD in the same location. They were socialised into this practice. And also the overwhelming majority of battery hens are on scholarship. So this means that taxpayers' money, public money, is subsidising the battery hen process. So the battery hen supervisors, they need their young hens. They need them socialised through their undergraduate degree into the battery hen model. And so the battery hen students don't have any alternatives presented. This is what research looks like. This is reality. So these students never really know any better. They're taught that this is how research is conducted, and these are the conditions that you must expect if you want to be a good researcher, if you want to be a scientist. So you notice there's no mention of, even though it's a cliche, work and life balance. There's no mention of mental fitness, collaboration, compassion, care. It's simply a system that was described in my opening story. The battery hen farmer simply confirms that the battery hens love this process. They love being in the lab. They love doing long PhDs. This is what is real. This is their reality and the hen's reality. Now, this system is currently undergoing pretty radical changes, and I'll give you the reasons why. Firstly, there are fewer students enrolling in the sciences. There are many reasons for that. Mainly, I think one of them is that there are fewer students at a high school level who have the high science and mathematic ability to be able to go into science programs. So at school level, the number of people in the high level maths and science is declining. So that means therefore fewer undergraduates are being produced, and therefore fewer undergraduates exist in graduate programs, particularly in the theoretical, the natural and the applied sciences. Now, this model does have currency outside of the sciences. I've seen it a lot in the applied social sciences, so archaeology and anthropology in particular. But can I also say the enrolments in those disciplines are also declining. So this is a problem. Fewer students are being socialised into the battery hen model. The public funding, the scholarships, the public funding for research is declining. So this means that this battery hen system is no longer being subsidised by the state to the same extent. And also the standards of teaching and learning in an undergraduate program are declining. So this means when a student finishes an undergraduate degree, they're a long way away from being able to produce a research paper when they enter a graduate program. So a lot more scaffolding has to be done for students now in research training, in ontology, epistemology, methodology, and just in writing. So when a student enters a graduate program, they require a lot more intervention before they're able to write an article. So our system is now enrolling wonderful older students. What a blessing they are. And of course, they know about the world and they're often self-funded, and they won't put up with this rubbish. They won't put up with this exploitation. They're interested in gaining a lot more from a doctoral program than 3 published papers. So our younger students don't know any differently. They don't know that there are other ways of living and doing research. They've become used to that darkened room without space where they can't move too much. But the number of students in this system, they're reducing in number. So there is no doubt that our universities have validated this nonsense, this model, this system for far too long. Dreadful, untrained supervisors pumping out papers with young students who don't know any better. So this homological model means that supervision that was accepted is now being critiqued, and strongly. So because it's being critiqued, it's because of so many of the issues that we've talked about through this series, and indeed all the relationships we've had for years now. So the problems that are emerging are student attrition, profound mental health concerns, research misconduct, issues with authorship, and also sexual harassment, sexual assault. Now, I told that story that started off this post this week, but I've told a story quite often about when I just started as Dean and I was in a meeting with very, very senior researchers and senior research managers. I was in this meeting with my beloved late husband, Professor Steve Redhead, and we were sitting there and a senior female researcher described her PhD students as slaves. As slaves. Now that's appalling enough. What makes it even worse is the people in that meeting laughed at that label. So people know about this system, they do, they know about this system, and it's accepted. There's no empathy, there's no care for students. The battery hen farmer does not care about one chicken over another. They only have value when they're producing eggs. For us, the supervisor only has value for the student when they are producing papers. And when the student stops producing papers for mental health concerns or the student runs out of public money, then they are discarded. So the best scenario for the battery hen PhD student is that they achieve postdoc after postdoc after postdoc after they graduate from their PhD. So they're sent from battery farm to battery farm to battery farm to continue to pump out the papers. And your battery hen farmer supervisor may support this because, of course, you will then provide a link with another lab or another research cluster, and therefore more papers can be produced. So you have no value the moment that you stop writing papers. But that also shows us, I think, how the postdocs become permadocs until they are exhausted. And the moment that the postdoc stops and is exhausted, they are discarded by the system. Now, this sounds ruthless because it is ruthless. There are changes coming into this system. It's much harder to keep a battery farm going now in supervision because supervisors now have to do training. It's mandatory training. Well, they complain about it, but supervisors have to do mandatory training, and that is a way to intervene in homology. That is the way to stop this. This is how I did things 30, 40 years ago, therefore that's how we're doing it now. Training is the slice through homology. Similarly, the radical transformations to authorship, research integrity and research misconduct are having a huge impact on this model of doing supervision. And I remember, and this is a horrific story, but let's go there. I remember the first time that I asked, nay demanded, that students fill in a form on every paper, published paper, that was also included in their PhD. And I asked the students to log a percentage of their work for research design, data collection and analysis, and for editing and writing. So the student had to state how much of each of those three functions had the student completed. And the reason I did that was not for the student, not for the supervisor, I did it for the examiners. So the PhD examiners would know what they're reading and who they're reading. Okay, and very early on in this process, a student submitted this form stating that they had produced 100% of all the work in all these categories. Great. Oh, well, that's great, fantastic, as I expected. And I emailed the student and asked the student to come in, and I said, that's great, you've produced all the work. Could I just ask you a follow-up question though? 4 other authors are included as authors on that paper, yet you've completed 100% of the work. So what did the other 4 authors do? Without any further commentary, and by the end of the day, a new version of the form appeared where the student completed 96% of all the functions and the other 4 authors had 1% of the roles in authorship. So as you can see, shining the bright light of transparency on authorship processes is the way to break up the battery hens. But so is examination. 3 papers are not enough to pass a PhD examination. Publishing is important, crucial, absolutely crucial, but the peer review of papers is different from the examination of a PhD. Now for decades, 3 papers were slammed together with a short intro, bit of a weird conclusion, and that thesis was sent out to mates to examine. Because you see, battery hen farmers were able to get their students through examination because they sent the theses to other battery hen farmers. For decades, what I've described as dial-a-mate examination has taken place. Theses are sent to friends of the supervisor and they pass them. Now often this is a reciprocal relationship, so I'll pass yours if you pass mine. And of course, if you can dial a mate to examine a battery hen thesis that's thin, that's small, that's lacking scope and scale, and it's just basically some stapled together publications, then homology, then the system continues without critique. It's only when we stop mates examining theses and we create a transparent, rigorous, accountable, ethical examination protocol that suddenly this battery hen supervisory model disappears. So the point of battery hen supervision is to create results. Pump out papers, and pump out papers that are efficient and they're cheap, because taxpayers have subsidised this research via scholarships for these students. And the supervisors, of course, gain a career. They gain a big publication record through this process. And so the battery hen farmers never look outside of the farm because they don't have to. And of course, much of our university system has supported and reinforced this model. Now, the battery hen farmers love their metrics. So when 2 battery hen farmers get together, they compare their H indices and pretend that it's significant. So my H index is bigger than your H index. Yeah, right. So the battery hen farmers are pretending that all those citations created on the backs of battery hen students, that all those citations actually belong to them. So while we are in a system that continues to validate a single number, like an H index, without looking into the H index and seeing, oh right, where was the author in that article that gained those citations? Where were they? First, last, in between. Now, while we're not getting inside H indexes and presenting the critiques of the H indices, battery hen farmers will continue to exist. And instead of eggs, their metric is the H index. So the fear is for me that today's battery hens become tomorrow's battery hen farmers. So to stop this process and to help you, if you are a battery hen right now, hello, we are with you. Come on. If you're in this situation right now, we're now going to have 5 strategies for you to understand who you are, where you are, and how to get out of this. Now, this is a very, very serious situation. I'm not prettying this up this week. This is a serious situation, and the 5 strategies I'm putting in place are really, really serious. Let's do this. 1, let's make sure you've got enough research to make a PhD. The problem with battery hen students is that you're all working on a clustered project. It's often funded, for an industry partner who wants a short, sharp and quick turnaround to solve their problems. And I understand that. So the goal is not for you to complete the PhD. The goal is to deliver on that project with the members of your research cluster. You're not delivering for yourself. Sometimes you're not even delivering for your supervisor. You're delivering for the industry partner or the grant provider. So you are there to produce eggs. You are not there to produce an omelette. The problem with the battery hen model of supervision is that this is very risky for the student. Each student is given such a small slice of an intellectual terrain to investigate that you may not have the scope and scale required of a PhD. You may not have the SOC, the significant original contribution to knowledge. Now, examiners do bristle at scope and scale. They bristle if any research is submitted into a PhD with a second authorship article in it. So if you think you are going to submit a chapter of your thesis based on work where you are the second author, you are taking an enormous risk. Examiners also have another key proxy that I've seen so often. And this proxy is a multi-authored article is put in the PhD and it's written at quite a high standard. Very good piece of work. Great. And then the rest of the thesis, the introduction, the conclusion, bits and pieces, is written at a very low level. So the multi-authored article's up here and the rest of the thesis is down here. And the examiner bristles because they immediately go, right, well, this student can't write well. So then they express doubts about research integrity, research misconduct, who wrote this thesis. So make clear, very, very clear, right at the start of your PhD, what is your slice in this bigger project, and patrol those boundaries for me. Make sure that your thesis is clear and sharp and robust enough to be a PhD. I've seen so many of you generous battery hens who work for the team and the team simply takes all their work and they don't have enough left for their own thesis. 2, make sure you have an ending to this PhD or you're going to die there. The battery hen farmer never wants you to leave. You are free labour, delivering eggs every single day. Remember my opening story. Those supervisors were happy and welcoming of students to spend the best part of a decade of their lives in the lab. They really don't care. They don't even think you're human. They care about their H index. The longest PhDs I've ever seen have been in the experimental sciences, and they're from battery farm supervisors. So you need to begin with the end in mind as early as possible. Please have research questions and answer those research questions. Understand what a SOC is. Make sure you deliver on that SOC. Read widely, develop consilience, and get writing for you. Because your battery farmer supervisor will leave you to die there. Your job, create research questions, answer them, write up, get out. 3, you need to prepare for a future where you are not a battery hen. Now, I've read a lot of troubling, but also, can I say, incredibly inspiring material this week about what happens when battery hens are rehomed. And most of the time, they really can't manage, particularly at the start. They have to relearn really basic things like walking, scratching, cleaning themselves, even learning how to drink water again. A battery hen student does not learn the key skills in research, in academic life, in life more generally. They develop a very narrow portfolio of skills. So battery hens, when they're released from the cage, they can't walk, they can't scratch. Even when they're free, they're too frightened to walk into the light. Now this metaphor, this model, holds for students. I know so many former battery hen students who finally graduated, and yet their life was a complete shambles. It was just a complete stuff up. They didn't know what to do next. They had no idea what they were doing. Let me give you a couple of examples. After an 8-year candidature, a graduated PhD student got a postdoc. Yes! She lasted 3 months. She didn't have motivation, she wasn't a self-starter, she didn't have the capacity or the skill base to work in a different way for a different person. And she just really didn't care about anything at all. She lost the gig. She was sacked. And another student who again took 8 years, had an incredibly bright future, brilliant young man, but he was exhausted when he finished, and he never wrote and he never published again, and became an equipment technician, very, very unhappy with his role and his life. So remember, when you are a battery hen, that there is a life beyond the cage. Prepare yourself for it. Meet people from other disciplines. Learn how to teach. Learn how to be a good academic, a rounded academic. Do professional development. Exercise your mind, exercise your body beyond producing eggs for your supervisor. 4, the big frightening one. Monitor plagiarism, self-plagiarism, and be reflexive about the relationship between your publications and your PhD. This is a big issue. You get this wrong, your career is over. Even up to 5 years ago, some students and some supervisors doing a PhD got away with slamming together 3 publications with a staple, often with the original formatting of the journal. So the journal's template didn't change it at all, just simply took it, photocopied it, put it in the thesis. So all sorts of fonts, all sorts of referencing styles were used, and also very repetitive presentations of literature reviews and methods. So obviously the same method was used over and over again with just tiny little changes, and that was presented 3 times. Okay. We also saw short introductions, weird abstracts, and some very, very strange conclusions. And it was sent off to examiners like that, to be examined by mates of the battery hen farmer. Now that we have proper regulation of examination in most systems, in most universities, this has been the greatest challenge that's existed to the battery hen model of doing research. But the other change is just as important, and that's the change to academic publishing. Oh yeah. Now, corporate academic publishing is taking control of your publications. Okay, so situations get sticky, very sticky, when a student thinks that they've given an article to a journal, they've signed particular documents, and they're going to use that research in the same form in their PhD. Now the days are gone when you can take an article as published and put it into your thesis, because we've all signed away certain rights in relationship to those articles. Remember, copyright controls exist to limit where that article or that chapter can circulate. That's the point of copyright. So when you've just gone, wow, this article has been accepted, I'm so excited, and you sign that, be very clear about the clearance and the copyright that you are signing, because you may not be able to use it in the thesis. And to add even more complexity to the situation, self-plagiarism has become a new problem. Self-plagiarism, and it is a problem that examiners are logging. So self-plagiarism, and I'm writing an article on self-plagiarism at the moment, and this article is titled "The Unicorn of Plagiarism." So self-plagiarism refers to reusing your own work. Now, in some interpretations of self-plagiarism, if you publish from your thesis and then submit that work in your thesis, that is self-plagiarism. Now, this is rubbish, obviously, but examiners are picking this up and they are calling it self-plagiarism. And then, of course, research misconduct policies have to be activated. So remember, when you have a battery hen supervisor, all they care about is the production of eggs. All they care about is the production of publications. They don't realise that corporate publishing has changed not only in the last 10 years, it's changed in the last 5 years. Copyright has changed. Plagiarism has changed. So let me give you 2 crucial pieces of advice. Here we go. Firstly, turn it in draft mode. Let me say that again. Turn it in draft mode or text matching software throughout your candidature. You need to use it as a diagnostic tool, not as a slap on the wrist like we use it in undergraduate years. You need to, as a student, use Turnitin as a diagnostic tool to verify that your work is your work. Now, particularly this matters, oh boy, if you're on other co-authored work, right? So say you're the second or the third author on a colleague in the lab's work, right? And that happens all the time. So you're a co-author. You need to check very carefully the overlap, particularly with regard to methods and a literature review, okay? If you're a second author over here and your text has been used in your first authored issue, you can see the problem, okay? Battery hen supervisors do not patrol and do not care about the separation of students' work. All they want are the papers. And if you are the first author on your papers and a second or a third author on somebody else's paper, you need to check the relationship between all these publications and your PhD. And it has to be overt and it has to be clear. Now, secondly, the other clear strategy to manage self-plagiarism, and this is really easy, this is a great workaround, we all need to do this forever, is, right, okay, so you've published that article, there it is. What I need you to do is take the Word document of the one before you sent it to the publisher. Take the Word document, cut and paste that into your thesis. Great. What I need you to do now is write a brand new, shiny, interesting introduction and conclusion to that paper. Write new introduction and conclusion that links with your research questions, that links your SOC, your significant original contribution to knowledge, and also provides a lovely smooth transition between each of your chapters. Smooth out the transition. Right, now that's the first thing you have to do. Then you must self-cite. So at the end of the first sentence in your chapter, put in an explanatory footnote. And the footnote has text like this, quote, "An earlier version of this research appeared in," and put the full citation where the article appeared. An earlier version of this research appeared in. Okay, so the way that you manage self-plagiarism is to self-cite. The way we handle self-plagiarism is self-citation. Now, I hate self-citation. Up to 5 years ago, I was just horrified. You would just never do it. Now, you have to do it. You have to do it because you need to show that this is your original work and you are aware this is how it's moved and this is its current form. Therefore, Turnitin is your friend. In draft mode, use it as a diagnostic tool. And 5, be intellectually generous and acknowledge collaborations with honesty and clarity. Now, we've talked about the battery hen, supervisor and student as being a mode of socialization. And this socialization into the battery hen farm begins in first year. And the weird thing about the battery hen model is that academic success is often told as a story of solitary success. It's an elitist story of one person and their success against the odds. Now, what's so weird is that success is based on a battery hen farm, okay? So a lot of our stories that we tell students about the success of other academics, they were battery hen farmers. They're the stories we're retelling. To give you great examples of this, a Nobel Prize is granted to individual scientists. And we all know through the history of the Nobel that a series of people that did the actual work for the discovery were not acknowledged by the committee. The Nobel model ensures that elitism and selfishness continues. This is our system, and that system enables promotion and publication and prizes. This is the model of the singular, solitary, male scientist overcoming the odds. Now, that model is inappropriate to science now, let alone the rest of the disciplines. And the problem we have is the stories we tell about being a successful academic are retelling the stories of the battery hen farmers in the past. So when I was writing this post for you this week, and I always, Sunday morning, I talk about each of these posts with Jamie. And Jamie, of course, physicist, remarkable physicist, professor of natural science, head of school, but physicist, remarkable physicist. And Jamie told me 2 stories that physics professors told his group of first year students. So think of beautiful Jamie at 18 years of age in a classroom. And the first story that a professor told Jamie in his first lecture at university was the story of Ernest Rutherford. Now, think about, and this is a story, we don't know if it's true or not, this is the story that was told young students. Think about what we learn about academic work from this story. So here's the story. Ernest Rutherford would go to his Cambridge lab at 8 a.m. every morning and give his battery hen students a pep talk. Yeah. And then Ernest Rutherford would leave and he would return at 6 p.m. every day and ask his students, "What have you got for me?" So what do we learn from this story? What do those 18-year-old lads learn from this story? Battery hens are going to work long days. Their job is to supply data sets. They have no other function, and no alternative socializations are presented or available. And the second story that Jamie told me again came from a professor of physics in his first year of his degree. And he was so shocked, he still gets upset whenever he tells me the story of this memory. So, always a mistake. One of these professors was telling the class a joke. Okay? And I want you to think about the assumptions, the elitism that's involved in this joke. Here's the joke. Quote, "The best thing about having a wife and a mistress is you can tell one of them that you're with the other one and you can spend more time in the lab." End of quote. Yeah, funny in a sad, sick way. Okay, so what are we learning? What's the socialisation here? Okay, firstly, we're learning neglect of families, that academia is not a 9-to-5 job, it's 100-hour weeks, thanks for playing. Yes, we see the sexism, the complete invisibility of women beyond the roles of wife and mistress, loving that. But let's park the woman issue for a moment if we can, and think about the role of that story in making or building battery hens. Young people being socialised into this reality. Students moving from first year to an undergraduate degree, to an honours or a capstone project, to their PhD. Now, this system only ends when we as teachers stop teaching in this way. This system only ends when we as researchers stop denying the changes to publishing, to authorship, and to plagiarism. And it only stops when we as humans make a decision to stop the exploitation and stop building our careers on the backs and the sweat and the slog of others. When we validate collaboration rather than competition, when we acknowledge authorship contributions with rigour and transparency and clarity, when we help and support rather than hit and hinder, we will transform academic life, and we will be able to intervene so that colleagues have choices. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.